With more than 100 years of experience, Mitas is one of Europe's leading motorcycle tyre brands. Whether you ride on the trails, enduro, on the road or on adventures, Mitas have the tyres for you. If they're good enough for the likes of Chris Birch and Paul Tarris, they're good enough for me and our Noel. For more information, go to mitas-moto.com. Go the distance with Mitas tyres.
Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast.
Hello everybody, it's going to be a fairly brief introduction. Well, I say that, let's see how it goes, eh? I guess this is the first time officially without my good mate, Noel Tom. It's made no difference. This is an absolutely blinding episode. First of all, a massive thanks out to Simon, who actually chatted to the one and only Joey Evans at ABR and suggested that he should come on the podcast. And being the absolutely lovely guy he is, he agreed straight away. We've had to move it a couple of times because he's so busy with work and still with racing. Fair play to him. Thank you very much, Simon, for helping to organise this. This is, I mean, if you don't know Joey Evans, then you're in for a massive treat. If you do know Joey Evans, then, as you well know, you're still in for a massive treat. This is an absolutely blinding episode, and I'm going to shut up now and just get on with it. Oh, one more thing. Thanks also go out to Grant White from Future Terrain. Those of you that know the podcast will know Grant from previous episodes. I asked Grant to come and join in this podcast because obviously he has a fair amount of experience in dealing with people and getting people with disabilities onto motorcycles and into four wheels as well. So I thought there'd be a good bit of commonality between what Grant has done with his charity, Future Terrain, and what Joey has done for himself. Right, I will shut up now. Let's get on with it. It looks like you started Christmas already. I saw something on Facebook the other day with you and many, many women. They're outnumbered.
That's kind of the story of my life.
I have to say this because Clive mentioned it earlier. I think Clive's obviously been reading your book because he's smashed all his teeth out.
Oh, no.
In sympathy, listening to your story.
The good news is I've still got them. I can't afford to go to the dentist. I've got some glue. I'm going to put them back in myself. I better explain who Grant is. My normal podcast partner, my podcast partner for the last 7 years, Noel, has resigned from the podcast recently. So I'm going through a bit of a transition phase. Grant is a good friend of the podcast and we've ridden and raced together. But Grant, how do you describe somebody with one leg? An amputee?
Yeah, amputee, asymmetric, whatever you want. Yeah. With all the amputees I hang around with, I have a scratch. I'm below knee amputee.
Grant runs a charity in the UK called Future Terrain. But I thought with the experience that Grant has got of working with people with disabilities, mainly military, I thought it'd be a really good person to join in the podcast as well.
Oh, brilliant, man.
Tell us a little bit about Future Terrain, Grant.
Future Terrain is a charity that predominantly supports wounded, injured, sick military servicemen. We cater for people that have got limb loss. We've got people that have suffered paraplegia. One of our main beneficiaries is a T12 paraplegic. And obviously a lot of mental health PTSD sufferers. But we started off in the world of off-road racing in cars. The charity was a predecessor to mine. Race to Recovery is a charity you may have heard of. We're the first charity to get disabled people across the finish line at the Dakar in cars a couple of years before you did yours.
Yeah, I remember seeing something like that years ago. Yeah.
I know that, and a big part of what they did was campaigning for disability in motorsport. And I'm sure you did. You came across a lot of resistance, when trying to do these events. Certainly on the UK circuit, we championed and changed the rules and the laws around disability in motorsport. But we moved away from motorsport and do more expeditionary work now because it's easier to cater for more people. So we've done the Sahara a couple of times. We did the Dakar Rally. And we take, let's say, people with paraplegia. We do bikes and side-by-sides and cars. Bikes is my thing. So I try to get many. So we've had one-armed bikers, one-legged bikers, mainly in that off-road environment. What intrigues me about your condition and what you've done is that we're all about catering for injury and trying to modify vehicles and modify the experience to allow people to just do what you've done, really. Not to the extent, but to at least to have a taste of what you've done in terms of testing the boundaries of their disability.
Man, I love that. That's super cool.
You do something similar, don't you, Joey, with your pal that does the adaptive sports charity?
Yeah, so I met a buddy a long time ago now, a bunch of years ago. It was after Dakar. His name was Jeffrey. He's a quadriplegic, and we met and we became mates. And he had this adaptive sports fund where what he did is he set up this like a charity, a fund, where what he would do is he would organize these days where he would take guys with spinal cord injuries and allow them to do like some cool sports. He did like go-karting and scuba diving and skiing and, like some really, really cool stuff, and, rock climbing and stuff. And it's really tough because here in South Africa, there's not a lot of money for anything, let alone, when you start getting to handicap sports and, that sort of stuff, and so it was a massive challenge. And we spoke about, different ways of raising money. And I managed to do a little bit here and there, pre-COVID, and then COVID hit. And I was planning to do like a big one around about that time. I wanted to actually do like that Silkway rally and do a big fundraiser around that and stuff. But COVID hit and it didn't work out. And then obviously the race was changed and cancelled or whatever. And kind of life got away with it. And then about 2 years ago, I said, I'm going to go, race the Baja 1000. And I went over to that and I did a setup where everybody who donated, I put their name on my bike. And then what I did is I donated every single cent of that to the fund. I paid all the costs myself to go do the race, and I just donated everything to the fund. And we literally raised, obviously South African money is different, but we raised probably 15 times anything they'd ever had before that they were trying to make to last a year. So it was like just a massive, massive amount. And so it's been able to pay for a whole bunch of events last year and a whole bunch of events this year. And then I've done some more stuff with the guys this year. And it's just awesome, man. I mean, one of the hardest things I felt when I was, in the wheelchair for so long was that the hard thing is you can't hang out with your mates. You might be at, we call it a braai, you guys call it a barbecue. You'll be at the barbecue late in the afternoon with some buddies that you've been invited to that, or you're hanging out with them then, but they'll be telling you about a ride they did that morning.
Standing under the umbrella in Britain.
Turning the sausages. So we're in the sunshine with big, fat, juicy steaks. And then the guys are telling you about, the ride they did in the mountains that morning. And it's great to hang out with your mates, but you just missed out. You feel like you missed out on the whole day, because you couldn't do that stuff. And so part of what we do is we want to allow those guys to be part of it. Probably one of the outstanding memories for me was a few years ago, we did a go-kart event where we go to, like a mall, shopping mall go-karting thing, like in the car park, they have them, but we adapted all the carts with hand controls. So you'd have an accelerator and a brake on the steering wheel. So guys who are paraplegic could race the cars. And there was two brothers. The one brother was paralyzed and the other brother was able-bodied. And to see these guys just ragging each other and cutting each other off and doing what brothers do, it was amazing. And you think of like how many sports can they do that now, being in that situation. And that was just a beautiful moment. And as guys, we get it, part of the fun is just ripping on each other and, that kind of stuff. And so it was like, we gave them that for that one day. And that's what we want to do. We want to make guys with injuries just be free, free of the injury for an afternoon or whatever it is, And
it's being part of something, right? It's going back to being in part. And you speak in your book about the camaraderie around racing. And when I say camaraderie, the piss taking, when you've got a good friend, right? When you can give them such a hard time and they can give it back. We absolutely learned that. We learned actually the racing and the was a background activity for bringing people together.
You can tell when you got good mates because in front of their face, you're like, man, this dude's a total ass, what a punk in front of his face. And then behind his back, you're like, man, such a good dude, man, such a good dude, and that's what guys are like. Yeah.
Well, you said there's an awful lot of mental health benefits as well, Grant. Grant was in an episode, was it this year or last year? And we talked in depth about exactly this sort of thing. I'll send you a link to it afterwards. But yeah, there's huge.
Oh, that'd be good. I'd like that.
Impact on people's mental health, wasn't there, Grant?
When we were doing the racing, what I noticed that when we sat down in the evening around the campfire, when the day's racing was over, that's where the magic happened. That's when people started to talk about their problems. That's when, and also you won't be able to talk to this, but that's when, especially with amputees, people start saying, well, how do you do this? You know, well, I've got this leg, or I've got this attachment, or I carry this set of tools. And those kind of interactions started, and it became really normalized. And to be honest with you, a lot of people with physical injuries, they're the easiest ones for us to manage. It's the people that are deep inside themselves, struggling with mental health issues. And they felt comfortable then to start to speak out and talk. So that's where the magic happens.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Today's exciting episode is brought to you by Adventure Specs Super Shirt 2.0.
2.0?
Yep, it's a new version. It's got the flow armour, which is a lot more breathable, and yet it's still CE AA rated. So it gives you both impact protection and abrasion resistance.
It's an absolute game changer.
It is actually, because you completely forget you've got it on. The armour's really soft. I even find myself checking to see if I've actually remembered to put it on sometimes.
It still feels wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But it's the first thing I put on for all motorcycling activities, basically. I even wore it and you mocked me when we were doing some trials practice.
Thank God you were wearing it that day, because I don't think you'd be with us today if you hadn't been wearing it when you got on the trials bike.
It wasn't that bad. It's even been crash tested on an actual human, which I don't think any other garment has ever been tested that way.
They threw a man down a runway wearing one, didn't they?
It's actually quite scary to watch, but he came away unscathed, which is pretty good news.
What do you wear over the top of yours?
Well, you know, I'm a bit of a hipster, so it's usually a check shirt and a very long beard.
Just something to hide the coffee stains?
Yes, the very rare blend espressos that I normally drink.
Nice.
So there are sizes for all, from small to, I think, triple XL. It's quite stretchy as well, so it'll fit women, and it fits fatties like me too.
To get your super shirt, head to adventurespec.com.
That really is a good thing on so many levels, yeah. My name is Joey Evans. I'm a South African based here in Johannesburg, and I've had some crazy journeys, and one of them is I was paralyzed. I broke my back, was paralyzed from the chest down, and 10 years after that, I went and raced the Dakar Rally. And today we're here just chatting and hanging out and swapping some stories.
Now, you say you're South African. A little bird tells me you weren't born in South Africa.
You won't believe where I was born. I mean, for the guys who haven't heard this, I was born in Birmingham.
We were virtual neighbours in that case, Joey, because I was born 20 miles south of Birmingham.
And I was about 10 miles, 15 miles east of Clive, so we're all Midlanders.
Okay, so this is a pretty rough group, I'm told.
Of the two accents you could have picked, I think you've got the better one.
Yeah, I believe so. We moved here when I was 5. So I obviously see myself as South African. I'm 50 years old now, so it's been 45 years here. But I saw a video years ago, where I was me as a little kid, and I was obviously just 6 years old or something. It was on an old, obviously a Betamax tape or something, that did someone record, and I'm like, all right, daddy, and it was, I got this, I was like, who is that dude, It's like, I wasn't even close,
Right, Jackie, damn you been?
Yeah, that's probably why I was picked on when I was that age, when I got here.
The good news is we are actually claiming you back for the British now. We're going to, Grant knows the royal family, he's been to royal weddings. We're going to have a word with His Majesty and claim you for our own.
Yeah, I believe a spot opened recently there in the royal family.
Yeah, you might not want to claim that one, though.
Yeah, I must say, if I'm being honest, I have both passports. So I have my British and South African passport, which makes, obviously, traveling, riding motorbikes and stuff, it makes my life a lot easier. So every now and again, I'm like, yep, and we'll use this book. And then I'm traveling somewhere else, I'm like, we'll use this book,
You came to motorcycles relatively late in life. I guess your family weren't motorcyclists. It's something you took up yourself?
That would be true, but also not on the other hand, because my dad actually rode a motorcycle when he was younger. He grew up obviously in the UK, and then he even did a stint in South Africa when he was I don't know all the details, but when he was younger, before he got married, and he rode a motorcycle around, South Africa a bit, and then owned a couple of bikes back home, or back in the UK, and then, got rid of the bikes and got married. And I didn't even know that he rode motorcycles for most of my life, that there was a time before. Then I, grew up without motorcycles, with no motorcycles, anything like that. I was one of 6 children. And so how we grew up financially, it was way beyond anything we could imagine, having motorcycles. And so when I was 26 years old, I'd saved up enough money and I bought my first secondhand off-road bike, and the rest is history.
Did you go straight into motocross?
I started with a Honda CR 250 two-stroke, and it was a second-hand bike I bought, and just started with motocross. And I think the reason I started with motocross, I had a couple of buddies in high school that raced motocross, and I was always like, I'd love to do that, one day. And actually bought the second-hand bike off one of them. Started with motocross, and you see it, when you're watching it, it looks so easy, and then you do it, and you're like, man, this is not as easy as it looks, kind of thing. And you start getting a couple of little prangs, and you start picking up some bumps and bruises along the way, and you start to learn pretty quick. And then after that, I got into a bit of freestyle motocross, with the tricks and stuff, and the metal ramps and things. And I kind of love that, being a guy in your 20s, that sort of riding, kind of attracts you a lot. And then I had while I still was riding off-road, I bought an R1, a Yamaha R1, and then I got into a little bit of like more the street stuff, and I had it for about 18 months, and I was like, I'm going to die on this thing. And it was, and then I sold that one, and then just kept up with the off-road. And then I got into enduro and cross country, as we call it this side. And, and that was where I found my passion. That was really where I found my home, riding just, forests and crossing rivers and mountains and going to Lesotho and, these kind of places. And that was just like, yeah, man. And then I raced enduro and off-road, and I raced the Roof of Africa in 2006, and local championships and that kind of stuff. And I was actually training for 2007 Roof of Africa, and that was when I had my crash.
Tell us about the accident. What happened?
It was the 13th of October, 2007, and I lined up at the start of a race just south of Johannesburg. I was lying second in the championship at the time, and guys who ride and race and stuff, it's a bit silly. Well, we're all a bit silly, us guys, because you'll be in this local championship, and in the big scheme of things, it means nothing, Even your wife doesn't care, But you're standing on that start line, and you feel like this is just the biggest thing, and you're all in, And it's that whole guy thing of being competitive and stuff. And standing on that start line, it just felt like this was the most important thing, and I wanted to win that race because it was the second last race of the season. I could win this championship, and it just felt massive. I don't even remember starting the race, because into the first corner, I had a guy came in behind me, and he was coming in too hot, and he kind of crashed into my backswing arm, and we both went down hard, and I was knocked unconscious. And I was unconscious for several minutes. And when I came around, there's just people looking down at me, my helmet's off. And I realized I'd crashed. I'd obviously had quite a heavy concussion. And the first thing I realized is I thought my mouth was full of dirt and stones, and I'm spitting it out. And we realized it was my teeth. And I'd smashed out like 12 of my teeth. And then the next thing we realized is I couldn't feel my legs. And it was obviously, then they realized it was serious. But there was a lot of complications that day. They didn't really have a proper ambulance there. The proper ambulance hadn't arrived that day. And so they made a plan to get like some local crappy little ambulance there, because you have to have an ambulance on site to start the race as part of the regs. And these guys were not equipped for a spinal injury. So I lay in the dirt for about 3 hours. They tried to get a helicopter. Helicopter couldn't come. And eventually I was taken by road to 3 different hospitals over the next 48 hours. And I ended up at a spinal unit. And that's when we learned that I'd broken my T8 and T9 vertebra, just sort of bottom of my chest kind of thing. And I was paralyzed from just below the chest, all the way down. And obviously at first, as most guys are, you don't really understand the injury. You don't know about spinal injuries and that kind of stuff. Just like all of us, we'll know the stuff that we've had or we've had a buddy have. But if I ask a guy about muscular dystrophy or whatever, they don't know what it is, or Lou Gehrig's disease, or you only know it if you know someone who's had it, And so I didn't really get it. And they're saying like, no, you're paralyzed and it'll probably be like this the rest of your life. And I'm like, what do you mean the rest of my life, man? It takes 6 weeks to heal a broken bone, and then I can race. What are you talking about? And then suddenly the reality hits, and my legs are going skinny, and I realize I don't have bowel control, and I don't have bladder control, and then suddenly everything gets really real very quickly. That was really, really difficult. And then they fused my back at those vertebrae. They put like some screws and rods and that kind of stuff in. And now you suddenly realize, man, I've messed up. I've just messed up the rest of my life. and it was pretty dark and tough. Suddenly you're lying there realizing like my life will never be worth living after this. Like this is going to be misery the rest of my life. And that's a hard place to be in. It's a really tough place.
Can I just say, Joey, you speak with such brutal honesty about the reality of paraplegia. Like you say, people who don't know, and I've been fortunate enough to work with people with paraplegia. You see people, the mobility issue. What people don't see is that the catheterization, all those other medical conditions. And did you feel it was important to bring that across in the book so people know that harsh reality of life with paraplegia?
Yeah. But I didn't start that way. When I started writing the book, I'd just come back from Dakar and I'm like in that kind of racer mindset. I felt like I wanted to write about like how good I was and how like these were the positions and the points and the racing and how it worked and all that sort of stuff. I'd sit there like, because when I was writing, I'd often write at night, when everyone else is sleeping in the house, sometimes like 1 or 2 in the morning, just whenever you feel like when it's flowing, you just go, man. And I'd sit there sometimes and I'd get like teary, man, as I'm writing it. And I'll be like, man, and I thought about it a lot. And I thought, man, I've got this chance here to be brutally honest and totally transparent. We were talking, now, and you said, hey, man, what can we ask you? And I was like, yeah, man, anything, far away. Because, I thought about it and I thought, what, there's going to be guys reading this book, guys like yourself who've lost a leg and guys, but other guys as well who have dealt with like prostate cancer and that kind of stuff. And that guy's busy using catheters. No one knows. And he feels really, hard about it. Or you got a guy who's dealing with incontinence because of other challenges or a guy's to wear a bag or something like that. And it's got so much stigma around it and stuff, and you got a guy who's dealing with that and struggling with that, and here's my chance to kind of like put it out there and be raw and just be honest about stuff and vulnerable. And it was tough because also I have to say, man, I cried and this and that, and it's like it doesn't suit us tough South African guys to admit this kind of stuff. And so it's like it was something I purposely did, but it was something that was hard at first. Now it is easier to talk about this stuff because I've done it many times. But in the beginning, it was tough. A lot of guys that even knew me didn't know that I had to use catheters and that kind of stuff. I mean, here I am now, and we are now, what are we now, like 18 years after breaking my back, and I still have to use catheters. I have to self-catheter like 5 or 6 times every day. So that's whole tube in, whole tube out, 5 or 6 times every day. And can I tell you, it is a zero issue for me. I couldn't care less. Like, it's super quick. I've got really good at it. I often joke. I think I joke in the book that I can throw it up and get it in,
We're on video now. We're on proof.
But I do. I mean, I carry them with me every day. I mean, here's my bag right here next to me, and I mean, this is the disposable ones that I use.
Jesus, that's long.
That's what they all say. But I mean, here we go. That's it out the packet. That gives you an idea.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is at least 18 inches long.
So that's what goes in, guys.
Us boys from the Midlands.
But I mean, you look at that and it's like, that's the reality of it, man. And like you said, a lot of guys don't speak about it and stuff. And when I had my accident, there was no I don't know if it existed, but it certainly wasn't a thing, like whether it's Facebook or Instagram or any of that kind of stuff. And so you had no way of all the stuff you have today. And I saw there's a lot of stuff now where you'll have a guy in a wheelchair and he's explaining how his bowel routine works and how, his catheters work and that kind of stuff. And it's like, I never had that back then. And so to put it in the book and say, guys, this is the reality of being paralyzed and this is what you deal with and stuff. I wanted to do it to to connect with guys who are dealing with their own challenges, similar or different, but to allow that kind of vulnerability. Just to quickly sum up this setup. So my setup is I can hold urine all right, but I struggle to release. So I can release a little bit, but I can't empty. And so if I don't use catheters, what happens is I pick up UTIs, and then you go on this, then obviously you'll have the antibiotics, and then another one, they got to go stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's how a lot of guys with paraplegia and spinal cord injuries, it's one of the ways that a lot of guys can die is ongoing challenges with UTIs, and then you become more and more resistant to antibiotics, and that's how it ends sometimes. So it's something I have to do, but really zero issue.
Grant, do you ever deal with people in the very early days and weeks of their disability.
Yes, but not paraplegic. We've got people towards the end. We've got, I say, an ongoing beneficiary we work with who's fantastic. Very different character to yourself, Joey, but equally committed, aggressively committed. He's a T12 paraplegic, complete paraplegic. We do have people come to us quite early in the stage, especially mental health issues when they're diagnosed, and amputees as well. And I've spent more time than I care to admit working with people that are going for elective amputees, so mentoring them on what it's like, what's the harsh reality of it, and everything else. And when I say harsh reality, it's nothing compared to what you've gone through, but everyone's got their own path, right?
You said nothing to what like you've gone through and stuff, and you'll know that you'll get some guys that have a minor injury, but it's a really massive challenge, and you'll get other guys that have a massive injury, but it's not as much of a challenge. And so it's almost like you can't really compare who's got the worst deal. But when you are around people a lot, like you are, Grant, where it's like you see guys with worse injuries than you have, and it helps you to get some perspective. I see it as well when I was in that hospital and I'm paralyzed, so I'm paraplegic, and then you see someone who's quadriplegic and you go like, whoa, that is a whole nother level. You know what I mean? And then you'll see the guy who's quadriplegic might see someone with a traumatic brain injury and go like, whoa, that's another level. So sometimes it's nice to be around people who have what you perceive as a much more challenging setup, because it helps to give you perspective of like, okay, I got this, man, I can do this.
The only thing I was going to go on to say, and I think you just mentioned it, that, when I was watching you speak before, is how you increased your level of empathy to other people. And you spoke quite eloquently about somebody who's lost two fingers could equally be going on a path that you went on. And I found that quite incredible, that you could have that level of empathy, bearing in mind what you've actually gone through yourself.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Yeah.
We'll come back to your recovery, Joey, because obviously the recovery that you've had, we know that isn't a complete recovery. I just wanted to talk about motorcycling being dangerous, because we kind of know it's dangerous. I've got minor injuries. You guys have got more major injuries from motorcycle accidents. I just wanted to see what your views on danger versus risk, because the way I think of motorcycling is I don't think motorcycling is inherently dangerous. I think it's a risky activity. Obviously, racing is a whole new different level of risk. Most of us ride, and once we get to a certain age, we know the risks and we do what we can to mitigate against those risks. Why have you carried on racing, Joey? I mean, why didn't you just stop?
Jeez, man, you sound like my wife now, man. All right. So my view on it is this, is like, a lot of guys will say, well, you can get hit by a bus, man, and you're doing nothing wrong. You're just working to work and stuff. And yeah, that's true. And you can die in thousands and thousands of different ways. And at the end of the day, we're all going to die. So some people will say like, well, so what's the point when you ride a bike? So everyone's going to die anyway. So you might as well just ride as well. And that's kind of obviously false logic, because you increase your chances of dying when you take part in risky sports. And so, whatever risks you do, whether you eat too much sugar or whatever it is, it's all putting your odds up, And so all of us, we have this kind of like appetite for risk, or appetite for how far we're willing to go with what sort of activities, because all of us realize that if you don't take any risk, your life is going to suck. If you never eat a donut or a nice piece of cake, if you never get in a car, if you never go for a hike in the outdoors, your life's going to suck. And so you have to weigh up the risk versus the rewards of every single activity you do. And what happens with bikes is people who don't ride, they'll be on the outside and they'll see you pitch up at work with a broken collarbone, and they'll be like, you flippin' idiot, riding your motorcycles, you're 35, what are you doing? Look at you, and then they'll see you 3 years later and you've freaking broken your wrist, and they're like, you bikers never learn and stuff. But when you're that biker dude, and in those 3 years in between that collarbone and that broken wrist, you rode for literally just, a couple 100 days with your buddies, and you rode, through Botswana, and you slept in a dry riverbed in Namibia, and you got to cross the Maluti Mountains in Lesotho, and you hauled bikes out of the mud together, and you've lived this massive, massive richness. And then you come there the one day with a broken wrist. They're like, you're obviously not going to go back now. And you want to kind of grab him, by the shoulder and say, you have no idea, how rich this is for me. And so I think the guys that get injured and go back, it's not because none of us want to get injured. I can guarantee you Grant doesn't want to lose another leg. And I can tell you now, I don't want to break my back again. But we've done some cool stuff, man. And we've seen some cool things, and it's added such richness, and that outweighs the risks. Now, all of that being said, you better believe that I wear a helmet every freaking time I swing my leg over a bike. Every time I go riding, I wear a full chest and back protector. I wear elbow guards. I wear gloves. I wear, the proper pants and knee guards and boots. And I'm one of those guys that I'll wear everything because I know the risks, and I freaking want to ride until I'm 90, man. And so, I'm trying to bring those risks down, and I'm also trying to maximize good times on the bike. And that for me is what works for me. The challenge is when you get guys or people that are new to the sport and they don't really get how dangerous and how quick it happens. You know what it's like once you've had a couple of prangs, you go like, whoa, okay, gotcha. And so that for me is the big challenge, is that when you know what it's like, we'll all see that guy on the super bike, that dude who was me on the R1 20 years ago, and he's like, whoa, sending it down the highway, and the guy's in shorts and a jacket and a helmet, and you're like, bro, don't stop it, man. And he's weaving in traffic and he's going triple the speed of traffic, and you're like, yeah, you're getting away with it, but you're not going to get away with it forever, man. And so I think we all want to be old bikers one day. So I want to be an old biker.
There's a story I keep coming across where somebody has an accident, breaks their leg, and they give up motorcycling because they're scared of not living. A few months later, they decide to get another motorbike because they're scared of not living. That says it all for me, really.
You hit the nail on the head there, and that's how I felt, because obviously I was paralyzed, and then I was fortunate enough that mine was what's called an incomplete spinal cord injury, and so I started to learn to walk again, and then I went and bought another bike. And you better believe the judgments I got from people like, why would you do this to your wife? Why would you do this to your family? What are you thinking? Now, if you look at me at the time, which is how I am now, I can walk now. And if you saw me walk, you might think, oh, you might have a sore knee or something. You know what I mean? I don't walk particularly bad, but I can't run. I can't jump. I used to play a lot of soccer and volleyball and all sorts of things and skates and things, but I can't do any of that now. But I can ride bikes. And so when I get on a bike, it's like it's my superpower. You know what I mean? Because I get on that bike and I can twist that throttle and I can rip with my buddies. And so when I spent freaking 2.5 years in a wheelchair and with crutches and all sorts of stuff, and now I have an opportunity to get on a bike and go ride in the mountains with my mates in the sunshine, man, I nearly died, and here I am with another chance at life. You better believe I'm going to take it with two hands. So you nailed it there, man. When you taste what it's like to nearly check out, suddenly life becomes, you realize not only do you want to live long, but you want to freaking suck every last drop out of it.
One thing that I think about, and as you get older and you get injuries, Clive broke me on an event last year.
I think you'll find I supported you on that event. I helped you get back to the pits when you retired.
I'd like to hear the other side of the story on that one, but carry on.
Did you feel, I won't say miraculous recovery because it sounds a bit flippant, but did you feel emboldened after that you go, I've got through this so I can live life, and then I'm more inclined to take risks? Or was there an acceptance of, you are understandably more fragile than you were before? How do you counterbalance that?
It swings both ways, which is the challenge, because sometimes obviously you feel like, okay, cool, man, I got through that. I can handle anything, bring it on. And then other days you remember what it was like being in a hospital, and you remember what your wife went through and what your kids went through and all that sort of stuff. And you're like, I can't do that again, man. I can't go back to that place. That's hard. And so now you're kind of scared to get on the bike and, all that normal stuff. Anyone who's crashed a bike or a car or whatever, like when you go drive again or ride again, it's tough, man. And so some days I would feel like bulletproof, and other days I'd be like, whoa, it was tough. I think as I've gone on, I've tried to find balance. So, the big goal was to race the Dakar Rally. When I was in that hospital, I was like, that's what I wanted to do before that. And I was like, I'm going to still do that. And so it took me 10 years to eventually get to that start line. And for those 10 years, that was something that just drove me, man. I'm going to race Dakar. I'm going to race Dakar.
Presumably, you weren't thinking that when you weren't able to move your legs, were you? It was once you'd started to get some kind of motion back that you thought, right, that's it. I am going to push myself now. I'm going to get up on 2 feet, on 2 wheels, and race the Dakar.
I think I wanted to race, the Dakar was like a goal before I was paralyzed. Yeah, I was like, one day I want to do that. And then when I was in the hospital and I was paralyzed, I did think, like, before I even had movement, that like, man, if I could come back from this and go and race the Dakar, that would be, epic. But to your point, it was impossible. You know what I mean? It was one of those like, yeah, that would be amazing, but it wouldn't be a goal. It was like a wish. Like, can you imagine? But no, there's no reality in that. And even when I started getting movement, there was still no reality in it. And people would bring me bike magazines to read while I was in hospital, and I couldn't even look at them, and made me want to vomit, man. I was like, it was terrible. As it ticked away and I started getting more and more movement, and I started to then stand with the braces and stuff. And then you start thinking like, man, but what if? You know what I mean? But what if, man? Can you imagine from this? That would be, oh, dude. And then as you tick away a bit more, and I think really when it was little bit by little bit, and then once I rode again the first time, and then I would even mention it to some buddies, and to be honest, they were totally dismissive. They were like, I think Joey's on the meds again. There's no ways, you know what I mean? It was like, it was kind of something that in me I felt I could do it one day, but there was no reality to it, by any measure. Probably the first time where it was like, I think people started to go like, hey, maybe, was I did a race in 2013 called the Dakar Rally, and it was 2,000 kilometers over 3 days from Cape Town up to near the border of Botswana, and I finished that race, and I was one of only 17 guys who finished it, of like 46 guys or something like that who started. And I remember coming back from that and going like, we could do this, man. If I can do 3 days, some big proper rally distances, proper off-road, navigating and stuff, why not 13? And, obviously it's a big jump and distances and terrain and stuff, but it was like, that was really when I was like, all right, let's do this, man. Let's go. And so from 2013, it was like hard. And then I had another setback where I hit a cow on the border of Mozambique and Swaziland, and I ended up in hospital again. And I did a lot of injuries that took like 6 months to heal. And that was a bad one. And that really got me feeling that whole risk thing. And then coming back from that, it was like, when I came after that, I was like, should I carry on? Should I not? And I was back and forwards, and I was like, maybe it is time to give up. And I had that kind of conversation with myself, and I did a big solo ride for 5 days all the way down to Cape Town just on my own. And I just gave myself a lot of time to think. And while I was on that ride, I was like, screw it, man, I'm going to freaking do this. We're in, and I came back from that and I was like, we're going to race Dakar. And that was that would have been probably 2014, I think. And then it was 2017. I stood on the start line of the Dakar.
You're still riding, you're still racing. You've just got back from Mexico, right?
Yeah. So, going to your whole thing with risk and reward and that kind of stuff. To give you an idea of timeline, 2017, I raced Dakar. And then I didn't race after that for a couple of years, nothing at all. I'd ride with buddies, but I'd never race. You could basically say I never raced again after that, in essence. But and then in 2020, Lyndon Poskett was putting a team together to go and race the Africa Eco Race. And he was like, Joey, man, you want to come and race the Africa Eco? We were both on the same Dakar in 2017, and we'd met and become mates there. And then he'd come and stayed with me in South Africa for a few months, actually, in the end. Down here, and we rode parts of Lesotho and Swaziland together and that kind of stuff. He said he's putting this team together. You want to go race the Africa Eco Race, the original Dakar route. And I was like, hell yeah. And so then I went and raced the Africa Eco Race in 2020. And after that, I did lots of adventure rides all over the world, and, all sorts of little expeditions and some solo trips and, riding with different guys and all sorts of stuff. And then in 2023, I was like, man, I feel like I've got another big race in me, man. I want to go do something cool, and I'm coming up towards 50 and it's like, man, and so I went over to Mexico to go and race the Baja 1000, like 1,000 miles, which you race off-road, and it's normally raced in a team of like 4 or 5 riders, and you all race a couple 100 miles each. But they have like an Ironman class where you race the whole thing solo, and it's, that year it was like 36 hours straight. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go do that. And I went over. I had to buy a bike over there, and I had to get some other guys to build it. And I pitched up, having never ridden this bike, with a couple of kit bags, and got on the start line. I didn't have any support crew or anything, and I gave some chow to another team who carried it for me. And I bought a pit service where I just got fuel every 50 miles, and off I went. And it was brutal, and I was very, very ill prepared. I had no idea with weather and terrain and the bike setup, and I made a lot of mistakes with nutrition and all sorts of stuff. And I raced for 26, 27 hours, something like that. And I nearly died. I was hypothermic. I was completely out. And I was fortunate enough. I managed to find some guys that I knew in the desert. I couldn't even get off the bike or anything. I was in a bad way. I knew I was in a bad way about 6 hours before that. And I just hacked on. And it was, in retrospect, it was incredibly dangerous because you're so remote and you're getting passed by trophy trucks. Anyway, they lay the bike over with me still on it, dragged the bike out from between my legs. They just put their jackets over me, and I lay there on the floor, unable to even move. And then they got me in the van, and it was like an hour later, and I'd still had like no recovery. And I managed to keep like a couple of mouthfuls of banana down, and that was it. And we had to call it. And so that was hard. It was hard to accept. And I made a list of all the mistakes I made. And for the next year, I got the bike prepared properly. I changed a bunch of stuff. I was like a lot fitter, a lot stronger. I studied up a lot about nutrition for an event like that, and I built it all up. And I went over to the States and rode that bike in between when I was doing some talks for some corporates over there and stuff. I went and slept in the back of a bike shop because I didn't have the money for a hotel all that time, and just on a camping mattress and rode and just try to get better and better in between for a few weeks. And then I went over to Mexico. I mean, now it's like 4 or 5 weeks ago, I went over to Mexico, and I'm going to go do it now. And I had a much better setup, better crew and stuff. And we were pre-running, and we did a whole day of pre-running. We did about 140 miles, and I'm feeling good, and it's getting comfortable and stuff. And then the second day we went out, and it was just the two of us. And on a dry riverbed, I hit a rock that was buried in the sand and just went over the bars, and the bike landed on top of me. It was one of those ones where it like just whips you into the ground. And I was like winded, and I was pretty injured, and I'd actually injured my neck, where I damaged one of the discs in my neck, and we had to ride out for like 30 or 40 miles still. And so I'd had a concussion as well. And I was just there with the one guy, and he just kind of nursed me, and I had to ride that bike out. And we managed to get to the main road, and then he shot down the road, went and got the vehicle where we'd left it, came back and got me, and we had to drive to the border of the States to get to the nearest hospital. And then it was like over 2 hours away, and it was in the trauma unit, and it was x-rays and CAT scans, and they picked up the stuff on my neck, and there was also some damage like on my sternum and a bit on my back, and we had to call it. So I didn't even get to start. Obviously, we haven't spoken a lot about the Dakar, but I mean, the guys would have realized by now that I finished Dakar after, some crazy stuff. But that was amazing. It was like, and I finished the Africa Eco Race after some amazing stuff. And I finished actually 8 rallies in a row over those years. And it was like always amazing. And suddenly now here I am, and I'm sitting with 2 back-to-back what feels like failures. And guys that race and ride, they get it. You know what I mean? But you know what it's like as an individual. You feel like, man, I've like screwed up. And so then the question is, are you going to go back again and stuff? And you talk about risk and reward. And right now, no. I can't afford to go back financially and physically. I'm 50 now, and I want to ride for many, many years. And, I've picked up a lot of injuries, and this one now with my neck, putting some mileage on my back again and that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, so what do we do now? Do I want to ride adventures with buddies and go to all sorts of cool countries, or do I want to just still be like the fly against the window that just keeps flying into this window trying to finish this race. And so it's tough. And I'm not the kind of guy that'll, I don't want to never say never kind of thing, but it certainly won't be next year and more than likely never. It's hard to walk away from stuff. I got lots of riding left in me, man, and I want to make it count for many years.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You want to carry on riding, as you say, until you get to 90. That's possibly more important than finishing some race.
For a personality like mine, it's hard to accept. Yeah,
you're obviously an incredibly positive person, and you've had to be positive to keep yourself going. You do the corporate talking. That's I guess that's a big part of how you make a living now. Were you like that before the accident? Were you a pretty focused? Were you springing out of bed every morning to go and, because you ran your own business, you had the kids already? Have you changed since the accident? Have you had to change since the accident, or is this just Joey Evans?
I must say, I've always been a pretty positive guy. I wouldn't say I was always resilient. As a kid, there were times I wasn't resilient, but I think resilience is one of those things that the only way to get it is you earn it. All the data says that it's not a gene, it's not hereditary or anything like that. No one's born resilient or anything like that. You earn it. And the way you earn it is you either are forced to do things outside of your comfort zone, or you choose to do things out of your comfort zone, and then you face problems, but you don't see them as problems, you see them as challenges, and then you do that, and then you grow resilience. That whole resilience thing opens up, and then that circle gets a bit bigger, and then you go again outside, and as those years add up, and as you face different things, you grow with that resilience. I mean, a perfect example is probably the first time that I was on a bike at night was in Lesotho. I was down on a trip with some buddies, and there was 3 of us, and we got caught out in the mountains after dark, and we were on enduro bikes, and the sun was going down, and we were stuck on a really gnarly, rocky section, halfway up, and we were really fatigued and that kind of stuff, and we were a bit lost and things, and so we had to call it that we've got to turn around and go back, and we made that call, and then we started coming down, and it got dark as we were coming down and stuff, and we didn't really have any lights on the bikes and that kind of stuff, and anyway, we hacked our way out, and we got back to where we were staying probably at about like 9 p.m. and it probably went dark at like 6:30 or 7 or something like that. No big deal at all. You know what I mean? It's a pretty thing. But at the time, that was like, man, that was hectic, and that was a crazy adventure. And it was like, man, guys, that was like, whoa. And then there was a few times over the next time. The next time was, I got caught out another time with one buddy, and we actually rode till like 2 a.m. or something like that, and then I got caught out on my own in Botswana in the bush, and there's animals out there, and that was pretty scary. And I got in, I think it was 11:30 or something that night or something like that. Then at Dakar, I had to ride, and I finished that second last stage at 2:15 a.m. and I rode alone for literally hundreds of miles through South America. And that night I crossed rivers on that bike in South America alone at midnight. It was pretty damn scary even then. But can I tell you, the Joey that got lost in Lesotho, years and years earlier, he could never have done that in South America, never in a million years. But I did the one in Lesotho. I did the other one. I did the one in Botswana, and like over the years, and suddenly it's getting dark. I'm in South America on my own, and I'm like, I can do this, man. I got this. I can do this stuff. And then like at Africa Eco, myself and Greg, we were in the Sahara Desert, lost. And it was late, it was nearly midnight, and we were lost in the Sahara Desert, no one around us. And it's like, and we both just, we turned off our bikes and we looked at the stars, and we're like, man, this is just amazing, because there's so many stars in the Sahara. It just becomes something that you love. Resilience is earned, and it's earned by doing those things a little bit more. When someone's got a new bike and you say, hey, let's go on a 20-mile ride to go get some breakfast, that guy's nervous. You know what I mean? He's like, okay, 20 miles. Okay, we're going to go on the highway as well. Okay, all right. And it's tricky. But and I know that same guy could ride from Cape Town to Cairo if he wanted, but it will take him a few years to build up the skills and build up the mindset and that kind of stuff. And so you want to do 100-miler next weekend, and then you want to go to Scotland, and then you want to do a trip around Ireland, and then you're going to go over to Europe, and you're going to go, you know what I mean? And slowly, but that if he stays on that path, he can ride around the world like Lyndon did if he wanted to,
Rod Savage was a lady that rode the Atlantic on her own, and she came out with a really good quote which talks to what you say. Comfort zone is something that needs to be tested, and if you don't keep pushing it back, it will just suffocate you. It'll come close in, which is exactly what you're talking to there.
Yeah, 100%. One of the nice things I love about resilience is it's like, no matter what the situation is, it'll always be better if you apply some resilience to it. Always. It never gets worse. Resilience is like an ace up your sleeve. It's like a trump card that can change so many situations with just a bit of resilience.
An example of your resilience, was it the last day but one on the Dakar when you were knocked off your bike and your bike was run over and destroyed? That's a fantastic story. Tell us that story.
Oh, man. So Dakar, it was 13 days and I faced challenges, man. I've certainly, after the first few days, I was lying right at the back and I knew I was out of my league. I still deal, as we were talking just now, with a lot of physical challenges. And I'm a rookie. I've never been to Dakar before and everything. And so I'm already disadvantaged there and stuff. And I was struggling, man. I was really struggling right at the back. And within the first few days, I was like, I'm not going to finish this race, man. This is crazy. But I just kind of sucked it up, man. And every day I'd get on the start line and go, right, okay, just today. And I just hacked it through. And I found myself on the start line again on day 12 of 13, second last day, man. And I'm starting stone last because I'd finished stone last the previous day. And off I went. And I got into a section sort of mid-morning, a semi-arid desert. And there was this Jeep track that kind of wound its way through it. And there's vegetation all next to it. So you can't ride outside the tracks. And the tracks are quite deep. So they're like parallel ruts. And then they're filled with fesh, which is like really fine dirt. It's like talcum powder. And so as bikers, you just got to pick a rut and kind of stay in that rut. But we can only do maybe 50 or 60 kilometers an hour because it's, the rut's kind of going like this, moving all over. But the cars and trucks, the wheels will naturally track into the ruts. And so these guys are coming through there like twice our speed. And I'm in the left-hand rut and my alarm goes off on my bike to say there's a car that wants to pass me. And normally you'll turn around and they're like 100 or 200 meters back and it gives you time to like pick a place and get off the track and everything. I turned around and he's like 20 meters back and he's doing double my speed. And I tried to swerve off into the vegetation, but the rut is like axle deep, and I swing those bars over and the bike just stays in the rut. And you know what it's like when you're in a rut and you commit your weight over and that bike just stays in the rut and you're just going down. And I just plowed into the ground like this and I separated off the bike and the guy missed me by centimeters, but he crashed right into my bike and then completely rode right over my whole bike and just completely destroying my bike. I can actually send you a picture, Clive, if you want, and you can pop up the picture
great.
of the bike. And what he'd done is he'd actually bent the whole frame of the bike. There's 3 petrol tanks on the bike. He'd destroyed 2 of them. All the fuel had run out. Bent the bars, damaged the radiator, bent the triple clamps, flattened the whole exhaust into the back wheel, ripped off the right foot peg with the mountings, the foot peg still attached, completely mangled the whole road book, navigation tower. That whole carbon fiber tower had broken off from the front of the bike, bent back into the bars. The bike is just completely destroyed. And he stopped, just about 30 meters away, and the navigator kind of puts one foot out the car and gives me a thumbs up, and I'm like, no, you know what I mean? I'll come back, and probably a couple of other words there as well. And he just got back in the car and they left. They didn't even help me pick up the bike or anything. And now I'm in this track, this bike's destroyed, and I drag the bike out of the track on my own and I stand it up and it's done. Race is over, and I looked at the road book and I still had 660 kilometers to race that day, and I'm stone lost. There's no one behind me. There's no other bikes behind me, and I'm done.
Let's just put this into context for the listeners. This is the Dakar that you've dreamed about doing since you were in your 20s. You've virtually finished the Dakar, and somebody decides to run you over and absolutely finish your race. So all of your dreams, all of your effort, all those 9 or 10 years of getting back on your feet so you can ride your bike and even think about entering the Dakar. Did you ever get an apology? That's what I want to know.
Can I tell you? I don't even know who it was. Still to this day. So if somebody wants to do a little bit of FBI work, I'll tell you how it played out and then I'll tell you why I don't know who it is. There I was, and I'm just out the race, and I figured I'm out. I'd made a commitment to myself at the start of that race that I would never, ever quit the race. The only way I'd go out is if I was time barred. And so that means you miss your start time the next day. And my start time the next day was 4 a.m. Here I am, it's about 10 a.m. in the morning, 660 kilometers to go, middle of a desert. My bike's completely destroyed. The right thing to do is to just press the button and the helicopter comes and you out the race. But I started stripping the bike. So I stripped the whole exhaust off the bike and I isolated the fuel tanks that were damaged and just plumbed the one fuel tank in. I had to strip some of the navigation off the front of the bike so I could at least get the bars to turn a bit. And the wheels are all like this because the whole frame and the triple clamps were bent and everything. After a long time, I got the bike working without an exhaust, without a foot peg, with no navigation equipment, and I just started riding through the vegetation. And I'm just kind of zigzagging along, and it's really difficult to ride with one foot peg and on this bent frame and everything. And there was more cars and trucks coming on the track now, so I couldn't ride in a rut with wheels like this, And so I'm limping along, and it's going to take me like 2 weeks to cover that distance. Like, it's a complete waste of time, like ridiculous. And on top of that, I'm running out of fuel because I just had that one fuel tank with a couple of liters left. And so I'm going to go 20 kilometers tops, and then I'm out of fuel. And there's no one behind me. And the next civilization is like 65 kilometers away. But I just was like, I'm going until 4 a.m. If I run out of fuel, then I start pushing, and we pushed till 4 a.m. This is how this plays out. And I was just like, that's what's happening. And I'm going along, this whole race just over. And then I found a bike in the middle of this semi-arid desert. And it was a guy who had crashed. He'd actually broken both his arms. He'd been medevaced out in the helicopter, and his bike was left there for the sweeper truck to collect. I'd realized this guy had been medevaced out the race because when they medevac a rider out, they take the tracking equipment off the bike and they put it with the guy in the chopper. And so I'm not allowed to ride that bike. That's the rules of Dakar, but I can use parts of that bike. And so I started stripping that bike, and there was 3 Argentinian guys in the middle of nowhere. There was no other spectators there. These were 3 guys on old dirt bikes, like super old dirt bikes, just spectators of Dakar in the middle of nowhere.
And perfect mechanics if they're looking after old bike.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you the one thing, we had to get the whole foot peg mount. There's actually the bolt for the swing arm goes through that foot peg mount on the rally bike. It's a size 17 spanner. Now, I'm carrying like these little Motion Pro titanium things and stuff. I'm not carrying a 17 spanner, man. One of those Argentinian guys had a big old shifting spanner, this massive thing about this big, all rusted up, cable tied to the front of his bike, because these guys obviously fix their bikes, and he comes with this thing, and I was like, are you kidding me? And we managed to get it out and get the whole side, and we siphoned all the fuel out of that bike and stuff, and we took the whole exhaust off that bike and put it onto mine, and off I went, and I rode over 600 kilometers alone through South America. Never saw another bike or another quad the rest of that day, and then right up through the night. And like I said, that night I rode through forests and mountain passes and canyons and dune fields, and then towards midnight I got to all those rivers and crossed the rivers and that kind of stuff. And then 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, I was still riding, and at 2:15 I got to that second last bivouac. I had 1 hour of sleep, and then I rode that same bike 850 kilometers on the last day to finish the Dakar Rally.
Amazing. That's one of the best Dakar stories I've ever heard, I think.
Absolutely.
Oh, cheers, boys. But I'll tell you about why I didn't know who he was, because when he hit my car, all those cars in the desert, they're just cars full of dust and stuff. You don't know who's what's in what car. I was obviously also focused on the bike, and off he went and stuff. I was angry, man. I was livid. I was thinking about how I'm going to chop that guy up and bury him in the desert that whole day. That was part of what kept me motivated, I think.
That's the Birmingham coming out again.
It's going to stab him. When I got into the bivouac at 2:15 in the morning, like, I have to go fill out an incident report form now, and I have to walk to the other side of the bivouac, and those things are massive. I mean, it'll be like a kilometer to get to where the organization is, and they'll be asleep at that time. All the cars and trucks are pretty much in. Well, they would have all been in at that point, and I'm like this last dude out there. Now I've got to go wake up the guys. I've got to go fill out an incident report form and all that sort of stuff, tell them what happened, kilometer readings, write it all out. Or I can sleep for 1 hour and try to finish the Dakar. And so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sleep for an hour, and I'm going to finish this race. And so that's what I did. And then the next day, I rode those 850Ks, still mad, still livid, all that sort of stuff. And I started coming to the outskirts of Buenos Aires, and I realized I'm going to freaking finish this race, man. I'm going to finish the Dakar. And I thought, you know what? I'm never going to find out who it is. And I stuck to that. And so I thought, you know what, that dude just gifted me the best possible ending to the story. You couldn't even make up an ending like this. If I was paralyzed and 10 years later I went and raced the Dakar, boom, awesome story. To get hit by a car on the second last day, to find a bike in the desert and strip it and ride through the night. And I mean, you couldn't even make up that ending. I was like, that dude just...
Has anybody bought the rights to the film yet? That would be incredible, wouldn't it?
We went and talked to some guys. So here we go. Let's hope it happens. So I just thought this guy's gifted me just such an amazing ending. And so, you know what? I'm never going to find out who it is. And so, yep, crossed the finish line. And to this day, I actually don't know. And I'm sure he'll read the book or hear the story or something and be like, oh, crap, I was that dude, you know, but it's all good. It's all good. I've moved on from that now.
But it's an incredible story of resilience, as you say. And then when you read the book, obviously there's the big crash that you have, but it's just littered with, I crashed here and I stripped the skin off my arm here and I got run over here. And it's just like every one of those incidents, including that last one you spoke of, would have ended a lot of people's careers, and people would have said, I've had enough. And then you talk about your instance at the Baja. That in alone is a movie. It's absolutely incredible.
But it's like where I'm at now, people say you never ever quit, and you don't. But sometimes you need to change paths and you need to change where you focus and that kind of stuff. Certainly, like, you should face everything with like a high degree of resilience. One of my favorite ones is, how does it go now? Resilience is the refusal to accept a current outcome. And I love that. Sometimes it's like, well, this is how it ends. And you go like, no, it doesn't. That's often something that can change some pretty sad endings into some pretty epic finishes.
I've listened to lots of podcasts that you've done. I listened to one, I don't know the guy's name, Challenged Champion. I think he was a recent paraplegic as well, biker accident. Fantastic podcast. If anybody wants to hear more from Joey, definitely listen to that one. But I also listened to another one. Most of the things I listen to, Joey, I usually end up in tears, as did half the audience at ABR this summer. You talked about I think it was your oldest daughter had a car accident. That was a really nasty accident. I don't believe in fate. I don't believe in spirituality. I don't believe in luck. But It got me thinking, everything you've been through potentially saved your daughter's life in the end, didn't it?
100%. You know, I'm with you. I'm not a spiritual kind of fate sort of guy either, you know. But I don't believe that everything happens for a reason. You know, I don't believe in that, but I do believe that we can take really bad things that happen to us and find reason in it and find growth from it and that kind of stuff. And to tell you the story about my daughter, it was December the 19th, 2020, just a few days before Christmas. And anyone who knows South Africa, Christmas is in the middle of summer for us. And so it's when we have our summer holidays and Christmas and all that sort of stuff. So like pretty much most of December and the first week or two of January is like everyone's away, you know, if that makes sense, like everything's shut down. And it was a Saturday afternoon and my daughter was on her way to work. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon, sunny day, dry roads, you know, nothing like that. And off she went, and she's on her way to work. She'd left like 5 minutes out of the house, and she went down a road, just a normal residential road, not on a highway or anything like that. And there was a guy coming the other way. He was an 82-year-old guy. They think that he passed out and he went foot heavy and just swerved into the oncoming lane. And he just perfectly teed her up and had a, you know, almost square on head on collision. And he was killed in the accident. He died on the scene. My daughter, you know, her airbag deployed and everything like that. The lady behind saw the whole thing happen. She went up to the car and my daughter was still conscious. She gave her my number. And so she phoned me. She said, your daughter's been in an accident. And I have 4 daughters. And at the time, 3 of them were out in their own vehicles. And I was like, what, which one, you know? And she said, it's Jenna. And I said, is it bad? And she said, it's very bad. I just ran out of the house. Meredith, my wife, was with me, and my youngest daughter, Sean. I said, just get in the car. And I freaking raced, man, because I knew the route she was going. And I just raced, or I got to the accident scene before the paramedics. And so she was just trapped in the car. She'd damaged her pelvis, but she'd broken her femur, and her leg was like 45 degrees at the femur. And then she'd broken her fib tib above the ankle, and her whole foot was 90 degrees. And she'd broken her arm, and she'd cut open her knees. And so there was a lot of blood and stuff. And the lower part of her body was just trapped inside the car with all the engine and everything like that. And I got there, and there's no paramedics or anything. And my wife, I said, you just try to get paramedics and stuff here. And I just reached in the car, and I'm just I'm just holding her legs together as best I can. And she looked at me and she said, Dad, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to be brave. And man, it was tough. And so I just held her legs, and eventually the paramedics they got there, and they had to cut her out the vehicle and everything like that. And they put her in the ambulance, and seeing her get her out the vehicle and stuff that was by far the most traumatic thing, man. That was just so hard to see. And she was rushed to hospital. They got her into the trauma ward and everything like that. Her oxygen levels just kept dropping and dropping and dropping, and so they had to intubate her, put on a ventilator. And they normally start with 20% oxygen or something like that, and they had to keep going up and going up and going up till they were on 100%. And now it's getting late into the evening and starting to get late at night and everything. And all the specialists, or a lot of specialists, all away because of the time of year it is and that kind of stuff. Her oxygen levels just kept going down, even on 100% oxygen. And the doctors came to us and they said, she's not going to make it. You kind of need to, just accept that this is how it's going to end. It was just whoa, man. And so myself and my wife, we were in this hospital, and we were one of only the few people there because it was all during COVID and all this sort of stuff as well. And we just sat there, man, and we just cried together, and we just were okay. And we thought about how we'd do her funeral, and we thought about, all this sort of stuff. And it was just poof, it was heavy. She was 19 at the time, by the way. It started to come into the early hours of the morning, and the doctor said to us that her heart has stopped, several times, and he's had to revive her. And so we really are at end game here. But with COVID, she's in this area, and it's but we got to kind of accept this. And I said to him, is there not a way that we can take the blood out of her body and oxygenate it and put it back in? Is there not a machine that does that or something? And he said there is. It's called an ECMO machine. But he said two things. Is firstly, she's not really a candidate for it because her problem is because of this massive internal damage. It's like a machine they use if they do a lung transplant or something like that. And secondly, there's no machines available in all of Johannesburg. He's made some calls. There's nothing available because it's also a machine they can use for COVID, someone who's right at end game of COVID or something, And so there's nothing, there's nothing around. And it was the early hours, I think it was 3 a.m. at this point. And we're sitting there, waiting to hear that she's passed. And I just thought, okay, so if she's going to pass, you know what I mean? Or if she's going to die now, then it is what it is. You know what I mean? But I want to make sure I've done everything I can possibly do to keep her alive. I don't want this to end thinking there was something I could still do. And so what I did is I got on the phone, and I just started phoning anyone who I could think of who was in the medical field. And I phoned my physiotherapist, and she didn't answer, or her phone was off or whatever. Then I phoned a guy who was my neighbor, who was a maxillofacial surgeon, and he was overseas, so he didn't answer. And the third guy I phoned was a guy called Dr. Turon. And he was the guy who had fused my back when I broke my back in 2007 in that hospital with my spinal cord injury. And the reason I had his cell phone number is because after I learned to walk again and that kind of stuff, and then especially after I raced Dakar, I would go back to that rehab center where he was, and I would visit with patients there who were incomplete and helped encourage the guys, and I did a few talks there for the guys and that kind of stuff. And I'd also done a fundraiser for the place, and we'd dealt a lot together. So I had his cell phone number because you wouldn't normally have a doctor's cell phone number. But because I'd been back there, I had his cell number. And it's 3:00 in the morning. I can only get hold of people on cell numbers. I can't phone any offices or anything like that. Everybody's closed. And he answered. And I explained the situation as quick as I could. And he said, give me a few minutes. And he phoned me back in about 10 minutes and he said, I've got you an ECMO machine and I've got you a cardiothoracic surgeon and an operator for the machine. And they're going to get there as soon as they can. They got there. And we had to sign to say that she may well die when they hook her up, because what they do is they cut into your femoral artery in your leg and they basically plumb in. It's like a hose pipe that just gets plumbed straight in there. And then it goes through this machine and then they cut the main artery in your neck. Then they plumb the blood back into your neck. They went in and they came out and they said, they'd managed to hook up the machine, and then her oxygen levels picked up and she was on the machine for like another week, and she was in a coma for like 3 weeks, and then she was in hospital for 3 months and then rehab and all that sort of stuff, and she made a full recovery.
Wow.
And she's a grade 2 teacher now.
In the telling of that story, Joe, as all parents would, you seem to get quite emotional then.
No, it's a bit of dust in the room. That's what it is.
That blew my mind when I heard that. And I know you said in the C2C, the Challenge to Champion podcast, that all things considered, it's changed my life having the accident, but I would really rather have it not happen. I know it's nonsense, but potentially it saved your daughter's life.
Yeah, certainly, man. If I didn't have his number, that would not have ended the way it did. Like I said, I'm not one of these guys, and I'm sure some guys listen to it like, oh, that's so this or it's so that, depending on their life view and that kind of stuff. But I don't know how it would have played out. You know what it's like if you'd left 5 minutes later, if you'd done this different, if you'd done, you know what I mean? We go through that kind of stuff where we'll go 100 times around and go like, I mean, if I'd never started that race, what if I never bought that first bike? What if, you know
exactly,
what I mean?
Yeah.
What if I hadn't finished Dakar, I wouldn't have probably gone back to the rehab center, because I'd just been another dude who was at the rehab center, there'd be no like cool story to share or that kind of stuff. And so, there's all sorts of these what ifs and things, but obviously the spinal injury has opened up so many things to be able to do these talks and be able to travel the world and, ride with all sorts of guys all over the world. And saw speaking at events like the ABR Festival. And, I spoke at the Adventure Rally in Colorado a couple months ago, and being able to just Australia and New Zealand and all over the Middle East. And, it's been amazing. But I also still deal with freaking pain every day. I still can't run. I can't jump. I used to run marathons and ultra marathons when I was in my early 20s, and I've got daughters now who have just done their first half marathons, and they're working towards their marathon. My one daughter's working towards her first one, and it's like, man, you better believe I want to go running with her. Man, I want to go running so bad, but it's like, you can't. And so yeah, it's everything's a bit of a package deal, So yeah, if I could go back, yeah, for sure, man. I wouldn't want to be paralyzed, but it's you can't live life that way, and so you take what you get or how it's played out, and you play your resilience card, and you do the best you can with it,
I just wonder how many people in your position with your daughter would have just accepted the doctor's decision and accepted that. And I think many people would, and it must have been the same going through I wonder how many times someone said to you, you will never walk again, or you'll never do this, and you'll never do that. And how people get, one thing we push all the time is not allowing limitations of a disability. Don't be defined by your disability. That speaks tons to your approach to resilience.
It's like we said just now, it's the refusal to accept the current outcome. I also talk about a noble excuse. We all want to use our excuses. We've all got a ton of excuses. That's the way I was raised. Well, my dad wasn't around, or my parents got divorced. What do you expect? That's why I'm like this. Or I didn't get to go to a good high school, or I didn't like physical disabilities or whatever. We've all got our reasons why we justify different things. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's on you, buddy. You're an adult, fix that stuff. You know what I mean? So yeah, it is what it is. And then you do the best you can with the cards you dealt, stop worrying about everyone else's cards. And so whatever it is, you go like, right, let's change this, let's do it. And so with her setup, yeah, it was a mess, but it's like that whole resilience is the refusal to accept the current outcome. And you go like, no, you can do more, and you do more. And sometimes you do everything you can and it fails, and it is what it is, but do everything you can.
what do you say after hearing something like that? I mean, I've heard a lot of Joey's stories before, but every time I hear them, they still hit pretty hard, don't they? What a remarkable character. And we overuse the words legend and inspiring, but I think he actually qualifies for both. Yeah, that was amazing. It was lovely to meet him, lovely to chat with him. He's an absolutely lovely bloke, as everybody that's ever met him has also says. Hey, listen, it's nearly Christmas. I am recording one episode before the Christmas break. Now, this is going to be quite a big edit. It's going to be more like one of those proper radio shows, so I might have to get Simon to help me do this from Real Riders. Whether I actually get it out before Christmas or not is another matter. I think it's unlikely, to be honest. I've done loads of preparation for it. I've still got loads more preparation to do. I'm going to be talking to 5 people. Shall I tell you what it is? No, I'm not going to tell you what it is. But anyway, it's going to be good. It's going to be a lot of work for me. So this probably will be the last podcast episode of the year. I am going to take a couple of weeks break over Christmas. I've got some bikes to fix. I've got a bit of riding to do. And I've got some beer to drink. All right, listen, have a splendid time. You all deserve lots of new motorcycles. Get yourself that helmet. Get yourself those new boots. Don't fuck about. Buy the bike. Have a fucking great Christmas. I love you. See you. Thanks for listening. We really do appreciate it. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, please consider supporting us on either Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. Links are available on our website, tampodcast.com, where you can also go to our store, that's a shop in English, and buy some branded stuff. Please keep listening and, more importantly, spreading the word. Right, that's it. Just a final word from one of our sponsors, and we'll see you next time. Are you heading out on an adventure? Whether you're tackling the Tet or hitting the green lanes, don't forget to pack the Pits and Bits Towel Off Body and Hair Wash range. It's the ultimate waterless wash. Just pour it on, rub it into a foam and towel it off. That's it. No water, no rinsing, no fuss. It's lightweight, smells amazing, and most importantly, it gets rid of mud, sweat and odours fast. Perfect for when you're off the beaten track. Stay fresh, go further, and do it all sustainably. Grab yours now at pitsandbits.co.uk, and don't forget to use the code TAMP at checkout for a massive 20% off.